It's the end of an era for WWE Raw, as this week's edition was the final episode on USA Network, at least for the foreseeable future, because we know the Raw Netflix debut takes place next week, and quite a segment here to lead into that between CM Punk and Seth Rollins. Had some other stuff set up for next week's show as well, another match added to the mix, and seemingly maybe teasing some more matches as well that will join that card next week, which we know is absolutely loaded right now for the biggest edition of Raw ever. But let's start with CM Punk and Seth Rollins getting personal once again in a face-to-face, and just the hatred that was spewing out between these two made you want to see them not have a wrestling match, but have a fight. And that's what next week is going to be between CM Punk and Seth Rollins. It's going to be a fight. And we've heard, in previous promos, Rollins bringing up how he's going to be a different side of him we've never seen before. Punk kind of adding the aggression here and the frustration when Rollins is kind of, throwing the different verbal jabs at him about how Rollins, kind of was the person who stayed in WWE this entire time. He wants WWE to succeed, but Punk wanted WWE to basically fall apart after he left. Winds up going to AEW, as we know, which Rollins brought up in the promo here. Didn't say the name specifically, as you would expect, but bringing up the fact that, Punk goes and chases the money, and how did that work out for him? Meanwhile, Rollins has been here this entire time, and just the personal history between these two just continues to push this feud forward. And we always knew whenever they decided to have this match, it was going to be of a personal nature. And it all goes back to Survivor Series 2023. Whenever Punk made his return, and it was Rollins, you saw on the cameras and everything just going off about the idea that CM Punk was back in WWE, and this match has been brewing for over a year now. And we know the injury to CM Punk earlier this year, factored into them not having the match at WrestleMania 40, but now they're going to finally get to it. And it's going to deliver, and it's because of all the things they said in this promo, how personal they've made this. And, it's even Punk bringing up things like, Becky Lynch, right? Like talking about the man. When Punk when he says stuff like that, it makes it more personal. And we've said one of the successes of the Triple H era is just being able to use reality in these storylines, in the feuds, right? Bringing in things that actually have happened outside of the screen, that you see every single week, and using that to just kind of intertwine different stories and different people together. And that's why they're so successful, especially with something like this. We know there is the history between Punk and Rollins. We know that Punk was, one of the people who was connected to Rollins early in his WWE career, based on the fact that the Shield comes in and all that. And, Punk's kind of been playing the big brother role, right? Well, Rollins says here that Punk's not the big brother anymore. That Rollins is kind of the person who's eclipsed him and all these kind of things. And so I just thought this was a tremendous segment. Anytime you hear Punk kind of talking about, even alluded to Vince McMahon here, right? Talking about how, Punk left because he didn't like who he was working for, basically. But boy, that person loved Seth Rollins, right? And we know, Rollins has kind of always been somebody here since really that turn, 10 years ago now, where he hit Roman Reigns in the back with a chair to turn on his partners in the Shield. All of a sudden, since then, Rollins has just been one of the main event players in WWE for really a decade now. And so you just talk about the two different paths for these two guys to get to this match on Netflix. One of the biggest matches they'll ever do, just because this is the biggest edition of Raw they've ever done. I think it's rightful to have this match in this particular spot. Main event on the show. Yes, you could also talk about Roman Reigns, Solo Sikoa, wherever they decide to put these matches. These are both main event matches. But I just think you really look at what you're getting out of this feud, and it is kind of that old school nature of, well, I always say, you go back to the Jerry Jarrett line, like Jerry Lawler's brought it up before, like back in the Memphis wrestling days, the thing they had on the wall, right? It's the same thing. Personal issues draw money, and they're drawing a lot of money. As Punk said here, he's going to draw more money next week, but they're just drawing money right now with personal issues. And whether it's the personal issues between CM Punk and Seth Rollins, personal issues between the Bloodline, personal issues between Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens and Randy Orton. You just keep going down the line. Personal issues between the New Day and Big E now. All this stuff, right? And so that's just kind of where we are in this landscape in WWE, and it's working as well as it ever has before in terms of this just kind of this era, and maybe none better than what we're going to get with Punk and Rollins, because I think it's going to be a fight. Like I said, I think it's going to not just be a match, it's going to be a fight. These two are going to want to beat the hell out of each other, and I think adding in the personal nature here, bringing up a Becky Lynch, right, from CM Punk's side. Rollins kind of, rebuttal being that, hey, Becky's at home raising a kid. You don't know anything about that. Talking about Steve Austin taking his ball and going home, and Rollins saying, well, Austin said it was the biggest mistake he ever made. So just the back and forth here was tremendous. Highly recommend you watching the segment if you haven't already. It was just great stuff to lead us into that match, and I can't say anything else about it because it's like, hey, words really can't do it justice. This was such a good segment, and I think it really gives you the feel that you need heading into that match next week. It is a big match feel, and we'll see how it plays out and what it means for both moving forward as we head towards WrestleMania 41. But speaking of next week, there is another match been added to the card. Probably not much of a surprise, but Drew McIntyre and Jey Uso is going to take place on that show. Of course, you had Jey start off the show with the New Day, who came out. It was kind of Wade Barrett and Joe Desitore going to introduce Jey to start the show. But it's New Day who come out instead, and they want to get their words in, but the fans won't let them because they're still booing them. So you're seeing the reaction continues to be just tremendous towards the New Day. But Jey comes out. Eventually, that gets Xavier Woods and Kofi Kingston fired up because they don't like what Jay's saying. He brings up the New Day sucks thing and all that. Drew McIntyre attacks Jey from behind and then eventually gets the Claymore after running away from the ring and coming back and then hitting it there. So we've set up that match. And again, probably not a surprise. We knew they were going to keep adding matches to this card next week. It's going to be, a lengthy show, as we already know. Not going to be a 2-hour edition like it was the past however little while now. But so you add another big match. This is one they've been heating up. We talked about this. Like, could this be something that eventually gets to WrestleMania 41? No, because you got the Raw Netflix debut, and this is one that, makes a lot of sense for the way they've been building this up. Drew McIntyre, the Bloodline Hunter. Now he's coming after Jey, which he's already, seemingly taken out. The stuff with Jimmy, and everybody else, like CM Punk, like everybody who's been aligned with Roman Reigns. That's kind of Drew's goal right now. So that's kind of where he's at. And I think this will be another one, just based on the way they've set it up. It's another match that's pretty impactful for both because, Drew McIntyre is someone who has had these matches with Sami Zayn. He keeps beating Sami Zayn, right? But Jey Uso, can Jey step up and be the person who takes down Drew McIntyre? Or does McIntyre just keep running through these members of the Bloodline or people who have kind of been on the peripheral with that, whether it is CM Punk, whether it's Sami Zayn, guys like that. So I think that is something where this is an intriguing match too that you add to the card next week. Only adds to the WrestleMania type atmosphere that I think you're going to have on Netflix for this first show specifically. And so I'm looking forward to this one. I think this is another one where, there's lots of possibilities for these two heading into WrestleMania 41. And I think it's going to be interesting ultimately what their matches are once we get there. These two will obviously also play a factor in the Royal Rumble. Yeah, we keep talking about just this kind of rotation of top talent on Raw right now, right? And we know it's going to change a little bit with the transfer window and everything, but you have a lot of these top stars who have, great feuds going on, and, McIntyre's goal is very simple. It's to take out, he is the Bloodline Hunter, as I said. So anyone kind of in that same vicinity, they're going to have a problem with Drew McIntyre. So I think this is another one, again, that should be pretty exciting, and we'll see what happens in that one. I want to know what you guys think about Drew McIntyre versus Jey Uso. Who should win that match? How does it play out? And what does it mean for both maybe moving forward? But I mentioned the New Day. Like, I just keep talking about how good they are right now, and I don't want to ever skip over that because they're just doing such a great job, and they're going to have a tag team match. It sounds like with Rey Mysterio and one of his members of the LWO, which you would think maybe also comes up next week as well. If they haven't already announced it, I haven't seen it, anything on that. But elsewhere on this show, you had the continued stuff with kind of teasing more with Damian Priest and Finn Balor, right? You had the 6-man tag, which we know was kind of set up last week. Damian Priest and the War Raiders teaming up to take on the Judgment Day, Finn Balor, JD McDonough, and Dominic Mysterio. So kind of playing that up with still something. You're still going to have your big blow-off match between Priest and Balor, which, again, has got to happen pretty soon, I would think. So, we'll see kind of what direction they're going to head in with that. But I think the bigger story with Judgment Day right now, what they had the new theme music and all that too, I think, on this one. But it's still that power struggle between Balor and Liv Morgan. And we know Liv Morgan's going to defend the championship against Rhea Ripley next week. And you wonder, could Finn Balor kind of play a role in that? Or he's kind of mocking Liv Morgan for having a great plan, right? She always has the right plan. And telling Raquel to tell Liv good luck on her match next week, all these other things. So I think it's kind of interesting to see what the dynamic is that they're going to play with the Judgment Day and this leadership thing, because you can tell everyone's kind of siding with Liv right now, at least in a lot of these different scenarios, right? So how do they play this out? We know that it's coming at some point, because I don't think you can just all of a sudden get everybody back together and everything's fine. But I think you just think about sort of the history of this group since SummerSlam, when everything kind of started to change a bit. It's going to be kind of fascinating to see what direction all these people go in, especially if you do have Liv drop the title to Rhea Ripley, right? Or, you have something else. We already saw them drop the tag team championships to the War Raiders. So how does that happen? Dominic's getting interesting reactions, which we talked about. So feels like a lot of people that kind of going in different directions here with this current iteration of the Judgment Day, but we'll see, how that changes here moving forward. But I thought that was interesting, too, to note here, coming out of this with Balor still going after, the knee of Damian Priest, so they're going to have to finish this. It's just, we'll see when that happens. So elsewhere, we know who's going to face off for the Women's Intercontinental Championship. Dakota Kai, Lyra Valkyria. That's going to be your match. That takes place for the first ever, Women's Intercontinental title here. And so, not surprised Dakota Kai won. I think that was kind of expected, beating Zoe Stark. I thought it would be interesting to see which direction they would go in. Do they do the all damage control final with Io Sky, who got subbed in for Kairi Sane, as we know, after the attack from the Pure Fusion Collective, or do they go with Lyra Valkyria, who we know, has kind of been somebody they've tried to push forward a little bit this year. Had that opportunity to get to the final of the Queen of the Ring, lost to Nia Jax, but they've certainly put her in some of these prominent roles, and I thought a really good match with Io Sky, which is no surprise. I mean, most of the matches Io Sky is in usually wind up being pretty good. So I thought that was, really good for Lyra Valkyria. Helps get her, over as somebody who now goes into this match with Dakota Kai. And quite honestly, I mean, look, there are going to be some people who are behind Lyra in this one, but I think a lot of people are going to be rooting for Dakota Kai here. And, how do they play off of that? Like, how do they play off the crowd reaction, which could be a little bit different. So I'm curious to see what happens. I think you go either direction here, but I think Dakota Kai probably winds up being the first ever Women's Intercontinental Champion, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe it is Lyra Valkyria, and maybe that sends her in a new direction on things. So we'll see what happens there. But, I thought this seemed like a possibility. Always thought Dakota Kai was going to get to the final, but I thought there were a couple of different options on the other side of things, depending on what stories they wanted to tell, but they do go, with the younger up-and-coming star in Lyra Valkyria here, getting a significant win over an Io Sky, a former women's champion. So I think that kind of helps catapult her into this, final match to see who wins this championship. So elsewhere on this week's Raw, again, this was a lot of stuff on this show, video packages, highlight packages to really set up next week, which is not surprising, right? You even have the video package highlighting all the great moments in Raw throughout the years, which if I had to list off my top 10, I don't know how I'd kind of keep it to 10. There's been so many of them, but, Ludwig Kaiser and Sheamus, that's something that's going to continue. And Kaiser coming out, Sheamus kind of makes his, semi-return here. He's been off for, a couple weeks now maybe. So they've got to have their big blow-off match, is going to happen at some point. Chad Gable defeats Otis. Not a surprise there. Gable, kind of his revenge tour, it seems like. If 2024 was the revenge tour for Liv Morgan, Chad Gable's maybe in 2025, probably going to be on SmackDown. But I think they're clearly one to get Gable kind of into a bigger role, which I think will be better on SmackDown than maybe on just what's going to be a loaded roster on Raw. So not the worst thing, I think, for him to move there. And then, everything else I'm looking at it, R-Truth and Pete Dunne, match never happened. So Dunne comes out and attacks him. So just got tired of the Butch stuff. Just wasn't going to happen. So that was really about it on this show. Again, everything really setting up next week. And the big things that needed to delivered on this show, right? CM Punk and Seth Rollins absolutely delivered in their segment to really hype up things for their match next week. Drew McIntyre and Jey adding another little layer to their match that's going to take place as well. And so, getting to the finals of the Women's Intercontinental Title Tournament, the New Day continuing their thing in terms of just these guys who just can't understand why people aren't on their side. And so you got a lot of good stuff brewing, I think, on Raw right now. But everything is going to be different next week because of it being Netflix. And it's going to feel like, again, such a different experience because this is the one they've been waiting for, right? This is their big opportunity to make a huge splash. They want to get everybody over to Netflix, and they're going to have the card and the roster, I think, to do it next week. So that will be an interesting show, as we know. But let me know what you thought about this particular edition of Raw. So what are some of your favorite memories, too? Drop those in the comments. Always a fun discussion on that. Your favorite Raw memories on the USA Network. I think they said over 1,200 episodes. Of course, they jumped around a little bit there. Was on Spike TV, TNN, and whatever for a bit. So let me know your thoughts on that. Give me your favorite Raw memories as well. But appreciate you guys watching as always. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button on your way out. Happy New Year to everyone out there. And again, let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw.